I grew up in a house that was always playing music, and rarely did my parents ever pass the aux cord. I also liked what my parents listened to, which is crazy. I was never one of those kids that said, oh god, this is so old, this doesn't even sound cool anymore, like this is garbage. No, I really appreciated what they were playing. Iconic moment for my father. I love my father, but he was cutthroat. And when I was in elementary school and he would drive me to school, he was very adamant that his car did not get Radio Disney. And that still scars me because I told all my friends that my dad's car didn't get Radio Disney. Come to find out, when I was older, I don't remember what age it was that I discovered this, probably way too late. I discovered that every car gets Radio Disney, and that it doesn't work like that. You can't just pick and choose which cars get Radio Disney. If your car has radio frequency, it's gonna get Radio Disney. It's stuff like that where it's like, why, Dad? Let your kid listen to Radio Disney for the 10 minutes that you're driving to school. On those drives to school, we had two options. We could listen to the AM radio, or we could listen to the Beatles. That's where this journey begins. I became a Beatles fan at a very early age. It was never really a phase for me. I was stuck with Beatles music for my entire life. Stuck is a harsh word because I don't feel stuck with Beatles music at all. I enjoy it too much.
Yesterday and today. This was my first album. First one. Bought it at Carlton Stewart Music, Mason City, Iowa. This album was never released in the UK. It's only released in the United States. So this is a combination of songs that were put together by Capitol Records. The Beatles did not like it. I'm gonna play side two. I'm gonna play two songs that I really enjoyed. The first one, And Your Bird Can Sing. When I first heard that, I thought, well, what's he talking about? Well, bird in the UK means girl, woman. A lot of hard guitar, electric guitar, and then especially in Harrison's, if I needed someone, it's his guitar work is very, very, very good. So let's play.
I remember showing him the trailer for Get Back last Christmas, and now that it's finally here, it's been really a joy to kind of share that experience with him again and to watch this documentary series. So yeah, I would consider myself a pretty big Beatles fan. So today I'm reviewing Get Back and just sharing my love and appreciation for the Beatles music. Get Back is a documentary series that follows the Beatles as they create their 12th and what will be their final studio album as a group. It was directed by Peter Jackson, and it's basically a documentary about a documentary. I've never seen the original documentary that came out in 1970, but from what I've read, this is a wider perspective of what occurred in those rehearsal sessions. So the documentary took 4 years to create, and that's because they had over 150 hours of recorded audio footage and 60 hours of video footage that they were first tasked to then dwindle down all the way to a 2.5-hour feature film. But Peter Jackson felt that that wasn't going to be enough to actually tell a seamless story. He got the first cut down to roughly 18 hours, then called up the Disney executives, Ringo and Paul, and said, I think we should expand this to a docu-series and have this be episodes. The consensus of the group was that they should put their trust into the guy that created 6 films about mystical woodland creatures. Before we get into my takeaways from the documentary, I thought that I would give a brief history on the Beatles. So here is a brief history of the Beatles. The year is 1961. Location, Liverpool, England. A man by the name of Brian Epstein walks into the Cavern Club to see a band of local musicians playing. They are John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and at the time, Pete Best.
I was immediately struck by their music, their beat.
Before this, he's had no prior management experience, but he believes that there's something in this group that is special. So he convinces the group to let him manage the band and basically changes their entire look. They are no longer a biker gang playing in pubs. They are 4 serious musicians playing in suits. 1962. Brian Epstein suggests that the Beatles should replace Pete Best with another drummer. Sources tell me that Pete Best had a momager, and Brian Epstein was not a big fan of hers. Cue Ringo Starr. So now the Beatles are officially set. Beatlemania then begins in 1963, and the band really takes off. They produced 6 albums between 1963 and 1965. Please Please Me, With the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night, Beatles for Sale, Help, and Rubber Soul. 6 albums in 2 years. 1966. The Beatles say we're done touring. They perform their final live performance at Candlestick Stadium in San Francisco, California. Now we're entering the true peak of counterculture and the beginning of the psychedelic movement, and it produces Revolver. A lot of LSD flowing in that studio. 1967, Burn Your Bras. In April of 1967, the Beatles released Sgt. Pepper. Revolver was just a baby step compared to Sgt. Pepper's giant leap for psychedelic rock. In August 1967, the band suffers a tremendous loss. Their manager, Brian Epstein, dies in an unexpected drug overdose. Although I guess, are drug overdoses ever expected? Probably not by the people taking the drugs. The Beatles then decide that they're going to manage themselves. Never a good sign. That was where the Beatles first suffered a crack in the foundation. Paul, however, then begins to kind of take form as the leader and manage the group. A few months after the death of Brian Epstein, the Beatles release Magical Mystery Tour. If you're thinking, that feels quick to me, it's because it was quick, and I'm guessing there's a lot of unprocessed trauma. 1968. So the Beatles make the White Album. Warm response. Pretty good. Very dark. Quite a bit of tension in that studio. An album that feels like there are a lot of individuals writing their own songs and putting them on an album. The morale was pretty low after they wrapped recording the White Album. Paul thought it would be a good idea to get everyone back together and return to live music. That's where things begin with the documentary Let It Be, the album Let It Be, and the docuseries Get Back. And that is a brief history of the Beatles. Now the events that follow years after we could get into, but I think that's a good place to start my 4 takeaways. That was fun. Let's get into the takeaways. The long Oh? Yeah. You know what? Everyone's got graphic tees these days. It's not as cool anymore. Let us begin. Number 1. Without Paul, this album does not come to fruition. He definitely wasn't the most popular Beatle at this time, but when John is so inconsistent and George quits and the only other Beatle you have is Ringo, who, let's be honest, we all love Ringo, but Paul was the most enthusiastic Beatle in this entire process. He pushed the entire band to get things done in the 2-week tight deadline. I think the one scene that I could call out that encapsulates this entire docuseries would be the moment that Paul is creating the song Get Back, and he's pulling ideas out of thin air, and he's literally just strumming his bass guitar, trying to figure out what's working, what's sounding good, what could be something that sounds good, all of these unknowns, and he's literally just going through this artistic process. And it's just a testament to, you know, when their backs were against the wall, they were still able to come up with some ingenious things. And that's how brilliant this band was, is that even when they were down for the count, you could still rely on them, that something would materialize and they would be able to actually pull something together in the last minute and produce a show that was kind of historic. Without Paul, none of this really happens. Number 2, poor George. My heart ached this entire series for that man. Sir Paul, more like, sir, sit down, shut up, and let George share his songs. No wonder John is gone for like half of the series. He's probably smoking a joint with Yoko, trying to just avoid confrontation And you could tell that he could really only take Paul in very small doses at this point. You could understand why George was so upset throughout this entire process. They had such a tight deadline with really unrealistic expectations and needed songs to perform, and yet the songs that George then produced for the band went overlooked and tossed aside. But let's all take a step back and be honest with ourselves. Your backs are against the wall and you need a miracle to come through. Is George Harrison the guy you're gonna tap in? I don't think so. Is George your favorite Beatle? Probably not. He's not my favorite Beatle. We all know why. He doesn't really say much. He's kind of just sitting in the corner. He's very soft-spoken. You know, the funny thing is that I really like George's solo album. But at the time, a 25-year-old, I don't think that even his songwriting chops then were as refined as John and Paul. And when you're thinking about the chemistry between John and Paul, it's really hard to compete with, and George just didn't have the chemistry. Number 3, the way we talk about Betty White and how she's a cherished treasure and that we should protect her at all costs, we should be talking that way about Ringo Starr, because that man should be protected at all costs. I think Ringo was the reason why everything remained peaceful until the end. 4. And arguably the most important takeaway in my opinion. Yoko Ono was not the reason why the Beatles broke up. The breakup was inevitable, and it's very obvious when you see the fractured relationships between each member of the group. It honestly looks like you're watching a divorce take place. Sure, you can argue that Yoko's arrival and attachment to John was annoying. I do think she needs more hobbies. I mean, it's very healthy to have alone time now and again. Take Yoko out of the picture, you still have a pissed off George Harrison, a bossy Paul McCartney, and John Lennon, who seems to subvert everything that is in discussion. If I had to add one more takeaway, I think it's that these guys truly loved playing music with one another. And I think the business and the egos unfortunately got in the way in the end, but they were brilliant, brilliant artists who had a lot of respect, admiration, and love for one another. And I think that is very clear in this documentary, despite all of the arguments and the tension that existed, which there is tension, and you can definitely see that the good days were long over and it was the beginning of the end for the band. But they did truly love one another, which you can't say that about a lot of bands. So those are my 5 takeaways. But I also have some serious Beatles hot takes that I just wanted to hash out while I'm here. Number 1, we would respect Magical Mystery Tour more if the cover art wasn't designed by a 3rd grader using word art and kid pics for the first time. It's definitely not the creative direction that I would have gone in. Stars to spell the Beatles. No. Not after you put out easily the greatest piece of cover art with Sgt. Pepper. You can't follow it up with this garbage. Hot take number 2. If we drop A Day in the Life from Sgt. Pepper, I don't think that album holds the torch of being considered the greatest album of all time. Some will say, not everyone agrees. Art is subjective, to each their own. However, it's recognized as one of the greatest albums of all time for many reasons. But I think A Day in the Life, which I would consider to be the greatest Beatles song ever written, since that song is on the album, I think that it carries a lot of the weight of how great that album actually is. You could disagree. I personally think that the best Beatles album is Revolver. That's my opinion, then I'll stand by that opinion. Tomorrow Never Knows, Eleanor Rigby, She Said, She Said, Got to Get You Into My Life. I could keep going. Name more groundbreaking tracks. Oh wait, again, Tomorrow Never Knows. Like, come on. Does it get any better than that? I don't think so. If you haven't seen Get Back, watch it. It's available on Disney Plus, and it is pretty incredible. So like and subscribe, and also comment your favorite Beatles song below. Peace.
This has been a Filmways presentation, darling.